In this video, I'll show you a quick and easy recipe for painting sandstone. Hi everyone, and welcome to another Brushstroke painting guide. I'm Brushstroke, and for this video I'm going to show you a super simple recipe for painting sandstone. And for this example, I'll be painting up this amazing base from Unreal Wargaming Studios. As I'm sure a lot of you will be wondering where I got the base from, so you can check them out in the link above, or I've also linked them in the description below. They make a whole range of stunning bases and terrain pieces with a crazy level of detail, so well worth checking out if you get a chance. So as I'm going to be painting a lighter colour scheme for this base, I've opted to prime with a pale grey primer. Specifically, the one I've used for this is Ghost Grey Surface Primer from Vallejo. And I'm going to start out by base coating the whole of my base, and for this I'm going to use some Thar Brown from scale 75. So the key to any base coating is to apply your paint cleanly and smoothly. So in order to do this, I've thinned my paint on my palette with some water so that it flows easily from my brush and settles evenly on the surface of my base. This particular base has a lot of small cracks and crevices, so I'm just going to take care to ensure that I get paint into all of those areas by encouraging it with the tip of my brush. As this is a big base and I'm essentially painting it all one colour, I can use my biggest brush and just work my way around the area and work that paint onto the surface. Of course, if you are fortunate enough to have an airbrush, then this would be the perfect case when to use it, as it would be much quicker. You would still need to take care to get paint into all of the areas around each of the rocks and into all the little crevices and cracks though. However you apply your base coat though, you will need to make sure that you apply it as a couple of thin layers and build the colour up to be a solid finish. And when you have, you should have something that looks a bit like this. For the next step, I want to lighten up the topmost surfaces of the base and leave my base coat colour in all the gaps, cracks and recesses. To do this, I'm going to apply a heavy highlight across the whole of the base using birch from scale 75. And the method I'm going to use to apply this highlight is going to be sponging. So for this, I'm going to need my texture board and a sponge. The sponge which I find works best for this is a makeup blending sponge like this. They come in a whole array of different shapes and sizes, but I find the small egg ones with this flat edge are perfect, as you can use that flat edge to press your finger against for a controlled dabbing action against the model. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sponge and dip it in some water so that it's completely wet, and then I need to wring it out as much as possible. I want the sponge to only be slightly damp, so I'm also going to use some paper towel and take out any excess surplus water too. And with my dampened sponge, I'm going to dip that into my paint on my palette, which I've thinned just as I would if I was going to paint a layer using a brush. Then I'm just going to quickly test dab it against my texture palette. This will allow me to see just how much paint will be applied and let me remove any excess before I touch it to my model. Very similar to how you do when you're dry brushing. Once I'm happy I don't have too much paint on my sponge, I can now use it to apply my highlight to my base by lightly pressing it against the surface in a dabbing or stippling motion. And what happens is the sponge is only able to make contact with the topmost surfaces of the base and not in the recesses and gaps, and so only applies paints to those surfaces. So all I need to do is dab my sponge over the base and the paint will be added to the top of all of these rocks and details, and the base coat colour is left in all of the areas the sponge can't reach. For example, on this column, because I'm only lightly dabbing the sponge against it, I'm able to add paint to the ridges and not into the grooves, thus making the grooves look darker and the ridges lighter and brighter. I will be doing a video specifically on the techniques of sponging, but for the purpose of this guide, just think of it as something very similar to dry brushing in that it applies paint to the topmost areas of your model, creating a highlighting effect. And just as with dry brushing, by adding some moisture to the sponge first means it won't suck moisture out of my paint, meaning it won't create a dry and chalky finish. As you can see, this method is a really quick way to add clean and smooth highlights across the whole of my base. I can even highlight flat surfaces like these cracked tiles by lightly dabbing the surface with my sponge, and it will add paint to the top and not down into these tiny little cracks. The pointed shape of the sponge does mean that the pressure against the surface will be at that point and less around the sides. So the imprint the sponge leaves on the flat surface is a stronger circle in the center and a lighter circle around the outside, which is really great for blending. But in this case, I want a solid color, so I just need to overlap where I'm dabbing so the paint is applied evenly across the whole of the tile. So all I need to do now is continue to work my way around the whole of the base and apply this highlight colour to all of the raised surfaces. Okay, with that highlight added, I now have a nice two-tone effect to my base, which brings some nice definition. So I'm going to further strengthen this by introducing some shading, and for this I'm going to apply an all-over wash of Seraphim Sepia thinned with some Lahmian Medium from Games Workshop. The ratio I'm using for this mix is 1 part Seraphim to 1 part medium, just to soften the strength of the wash and reduce the tint it will give to those raised and flat surfaces. And all I need to do for this step is apply my wash all over the base, encouraging it to settle into all the recesses and the grooves, so as to create a nice dark shadow in those areas. On the flatter surfaces and areas I don't want it to pull up, I can just push it away to the edges and the areas where I do want those shadows to form. I'm trying to keep my base level as I apply my wash, so as not to disturb areas where I've already applied the wash, but wherever I can, I'm using gravity to help distribute my wash. For example, with the grooves on the column, I can allow the wash to run down and pull up in the bottom, which will apply a nice even thin coat down the surface of that groove, and then I can just wick away any excess up with my brush that I don't want to have at the bottom. As I'm applying quite a large amount of wash to the base all in one go, it is important to allow sufficient time for it to dry fully. So once I've applied the wash to the whole of the base, I'm going to set it to one side and leave it to dry. Okay, my wash is now completely dry, which means I can move on to the next step, and that's going to be sponging a highlight again, and for this I'm going to use some birch from scale 75. Now, I know what you're thinking, this is a repeat of the step I did before the wash. And yes, you're right, it is. And I'm actually going to do exactly what I did in that step. The reason for this is because it builds a gradual transition in colours across the stones. By adding the first highlight to the base colour, it gave a basic two-tone to the rocks of light and shade. Adding the wash has further strengthened the shade, but has also darkened the highlight a bit too. So by repeating the birch step, it is adding that lighter tone back in and extending that colour transition over the rocks. It also enables any watermarks that may have formed from the wash to be corrected, as I can just sponge over them. Okay, with that layer sponged on, I'm now going to finish by adding a final top highlight to the sandstone, and for this I'm going to use some Mojave White from scale 75. And again for this step I'm going to apply it by sponging. Using exactly the same method as before with a damp blending sponge, only this time I'm going to be more focused on where I sponge. I'm only looking to pick out the topmost parts of the details which would be catching the most light, and by applying lighter pressure to my dabs than I did before so as to apply less paint. Very similar to how you would apply a light dry brush. So all I need to do is apply this highlight over the whole of the base, and that's the sandstone recipe complete, leaving the few remaining details like skulls and drains to paint in order to finish the base. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, then please hit that like button and be sure to share it with all your hobby friends. If you would like to help support me making these videos, then please consider becoming a channel member like these amazing people did. If you have enjoyed this video and you would like to see more, then please hit that subscribe button and don't forget the notification bell to be told whenever I post new videos. Speaking of other videos, I would love it if you stayed on the channel, so why not stay and check out another of my colour recipe videos, or perhaps one of my painting fundamentals. Thanks again for watching, and I really hope to see you again soon.